Okay, welcome colleagues to our plenary panel. I see some folks, okay, most folks are here, but some are still arriving. Again, apologies for the timing. So our plenary panel is on how the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the work of educational technology professionals, such as instructional or learning designers, whatever name or label you prefer. And we've got Greig from WITS, Toni from, sorry, I forgot to put UNISA, Widad from UCT, Gerhard from NWU, and Tshepo from Walter Sisulu University. So thank you very much, colleagues, for volunteering to be part of our plenary panel session. And I've got a feeling, Johannes, that you were also, oh, you were in the last one. I feel we should add you to this one, since you didn't get much airtime in the last one. But let's see how timing goes.
I don't think Gerhard is in the room, so maybe Johannes can fill in for him.
Ah, okay. Good to know.
Otherwise, I'll do.
Oh, thank you, Ulrika. So volunteers, who would like to go first? Greig, are you here?
I'm here, Nicola.
I am here. Okay.
Oh, great. Thank you, Toni. All right, Greig, I'm going to hand over to you, and then we hand over to, you can hand over to, well, we'll ask if there are any questions. And so, Toni, maybe you can prepare to go after Greig. If that's fine with you.
Okay, and are you going to put my presentation for me from Google Chats?
Yes. So I think I've got your slide.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Over to you, Greig.
Thanks, Nicola. Thanks very much for the opportunity. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Greig Krull. I'm from the Teaching and Learning Unit in the Commerce Law and Management faculty at WITS. And I'm just going to briefly just share some reflections from our experiences and the impact it's had on us as learning designers. So I'm from a faculty teaching and learning unit. So each of the faculties have their own teaching and learning unit, as well as we also have the centralized support, which is our Center for Learning, Teaching and Development, that supports academics and plays a big role in terms of learning design. So I think, as we've heard throughout today, there's a couple of themes that have emerged, and I think I'm just going to touch on some of these that have been talked about already. So I think before the pandemic, certainly in the case of WITS, like most institutions, there were very small numbers of academics who were interested in blended and online teaching. And so centralized units such as our Center for Learning, Teaching and Development would be able to work with often one-on-one with those academics interested. And then the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden there was just all of the academics had to move to remote teaching and learning and understand what that meant and make great changes in terms of how they approach things. So one of the things that we've seen is a greater need for capacity in this area. And so across university, including in our center, as well as in our different faculty units, we've seen increased resources, increased positions or posts being available for people in learning design or instructional design. I think the other thing that was a key thing for us is that particularly myself and Fiona in our faculty, who had just joined 2 months before the pandemic hit, is that it was, in addition to it being a steep learning curve for academics, it was also a steep learning curve for ourselves. So we were expected to provide support, and often kind of learning what we had to do sort of the day before, we were expected to support others. So things like using Teams, using Sakai was new to us as well. And we spent a lot of the time, particularly at the start of the pandemic, trying to make sure that we had the skills ourselves to be able to support others. And as others have talked about throughout today, we used a variety of methods. We couldn't use the traditional face-to-face workshops or blended workshops that we were used to use. So we made use of a lot of webinars, which attracted quite a bit of attention at the beginning from staff, just kind of, desperate to understand some of the basics. We also made use of consultations, primarily through email, but also through Teams and WhatsApp and phone calls, etc. We developed various support sites that created spaces for academics to come in and find resources, find announcements as we learned new things and shared announcements of what was happening and what changes were coming, resources that we either adapted or created ourselves. We made use a lot of open educational resources during this time, and then as well as other methods that we tried to use over time to be able to support academics. So I think as a reflection that there's certainly in the case of WITS and across the sector, there's a greater recognition for the work of learning designers, instructional designers, ed tech specialists, etc. But I think there's still a certain amount of role identity concerns, just by the sheer number of different titles. I heard this morning Stellenbosch talking about hybrid learning designers. So there's a lot of different titles out there, a lot of different roles, and often, particularly in the WITS case, not clear career paths for being a learning designer. And I think that's something that we need to work on addressing as we move forward. I think also in the WITS case, because we have we're a large institution, we have centralized support services through our center, but we've also seen the need for local support in faculties and potentially in the future, one day, even in schools. And I think we kind of looking at this cascaded model approach of supporting academics, where there's certain things that are done at the central level, there's certain things that need to happen for supporting academics at the faculty level, but there's also space for individual work to happen in the schools working with academics. Getting that capacity right, getting those support resources and structures in place, I think for us is certainly something that we're going to be looking towards over the next year or so. And I think, as been mentioned several times during today, but I think one of the things that's been important is that often people come to us for technological support, but in actual fact, we've been able to use this time to really start to think more and providing more support around pedagogical issues, thinking about alternative approaches to teaching and learning. We've just heard some of the big discussions happening in the assessment panel, so rethinking assessment approaches, as well as providing emotional support. So just thinking about in terms of, just providing a kind of calming presence for academics, listening to their concerns, helping them navigate all of the uncertainties, and just being there and kind of hand-holding as we provide support. And I think then just kind of moving away from the very operational, as we've been talking about earlier today, to more strategic levels. Nicola, if you don't mind just moving to the next slide. And if you don't mind, just in general, the shameless self-promotion, but we just a couple of us that are here today, so myself, Nicola, Neil, and Alana, one of the important things that we saw over this time was the need for communities of practice, and we formed an informal little community of practice across institutions, and that made a real difference in terms of being able to express ourselves and what we were going through as learning designers. And so this article was published last week that just talks to our experiences of what it was like supporting teaching and learning during this time, some of the lessons that we've learned, and some of the stories that we've shared, and ways for going future. Okay, thanks, Nicola. I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you very much, Greig. And I have a question. There's a question for you in the chat from Mary Ann on how are the roles of ID, LD different at central level versus faculty level at WITS?
Yeah, so I think at a central level, there's a much more kind of bigger picture role that's more focused in terms of professional learning opportunities. So things like how to use technologies, courses around, for example, curriculum development, assessment development of that as well as the development of sort of general guidelines and processes for around teaching and learning. At the faculty level, our aim is to kind of contextualize these, because we've got sort of 5 different faculties that have quite various needs in terms of how they approach things, what is expected in terms of the industry bodies, etc. So what we try to do is provide more contextualized support, sort of taking the general guidelines that are provided at a central level and contextualizing those for learning and teaching. And then I think also the other aspect is in terms of just support. As we've seen, all of us work in small teams. There isn't simply, even if we double the capacity, I think in the central unit, there isn't just sufficient capacity to be able to provide the kinds of support that academics really need, and to kind of build up the capacity in terms of providing the support, not just that academics need, but perhaps also support that we would like to encourage academics to move in certain directions. So I think the idea of having the learning designers at a faculty level is to be able to work much closer with staff in the various schools and provide greater support. And I think just having support at different levels just means that there's ways in which academics can be supported no matter what their query is or no matter what their support need is.
Thank you, Greg. And one more question, I think, before we move on to Toni, and perhaps then you can come back and answer any questions in the chat that were directed at you. So this one is an interesting one. On, some universities are using online providers, WITS being one of them. So how has outsourcing of learning design to OPMs affected the competency of the LD ID role?
So I think I have two different answers to that, depending on what the audience is and what space I'm in. But I think certainly, to my mind, we have partnered with an institution in terms of providing support for fully online programs, as have a number of institutions in South Africa. And that's actually why I was hired initially before COVID hit, was to support a few academics in just those fully online programs. And then the COVID pandemic hit, and so our sort of roles change completely. But I think from that perspective, I think for me, I see it as a partnership in terms of building capacity within the institution. I certainly see it as a way of trying to leverage the skills that those organizations have and being able to develop those skills internally within the institution, and therefore the institution then having the capacity to be able to have those skills and resources internally, and to be able to better support their academics, and therefore ensure better learning experiences for their students. So we have, we do work with HEPS in terms of the fully online programs, but as we've seen now, there's just a huge need for moving towards blended. And as we've heard throughout this today, is that the understanding of academics, and when we talk about blended, what that means, it varies a huge amount. So there's a lot of work in terms of support and professional learning required in terms of understanding what it means to do blended or hybrid learning and teaching, and what we really want to work towards and what we want to work towards not. And then just I see a comment quickly from Johanna about saying university staffing processes are glacial. That's been unfortunately our experience as well. We brought on board someone, we had a budget to get a new resource, and it took us about 6 months to be able to appoint someone. So that's something that's to bear in mind as well, is just the processes of getting resources can take an incredible amount of time and far longer than what they need to. So I think the administrative processes in universities is also something that we need to look at and address if we really want to ensure good quality learning experiences for our students. Thanks, Nicola.
Thank you so much, Greg. And please feel free to answer any follow-up questions in the chat. Toni, please remind me if this is your slide. I think I got it right, but I could be wrong. Unless you have different ones you want to share, Toni.
I wonder, Nicola, if colleagues not struggling with load shedding.
Oh, yes, true. All right, so let's maybe move on to one of our other colleagues along.
All right, I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Okay, wonderful. Toni, remind me, are these your slides?
Yes, it is, Nicola, and I was actually going to talk to it from my side. It's okay. Right, thank you. Can you hear me?
Perfectly. Go for it, Toni.
All right, so you can see that my first slide is talking about expertise that was disturbed, especially as regards my institution. The expertise of instructional and learning designers actually were also not properly known or defined before COVID, I must say, and during COVID, it became even more confusing to say what is the role of an instructional designer or a learning designer, what exactly is the difference. And that sort of confusion actually led to even our titles. Though we are instructional designers on one level, but we are also called education consultants, more so because of that confusion of what exactly is the roles of this. Anyway, we have our own roles, which we define ourselves as per the departmental level for these roles. But then the expertise was disturbed in the fact that, remember, the role of these people is supposed to guide teaching, guide learning, and guide assessment, actually. There's a spelling error there. And when we say guide, the guidance that goes with instructional designer is through or inside a framework for team approach. That's what we call it at UNISA, whereby all decisions or all guidance or all thoughts or whatever are guided in a framework for team approach or in a team. And that could be departmentally or institutionally, that what are we going to do? That is the needs of the institution, the needs of the department, and so forth and so forth. So that was actually the purpose of that table. But now coming directly to the title, which says, how did the COVID-19 pandemic impact the work of these people? The work of an instructional designer or a learning designer, or what is sometimes called an education technologist, is actually a very complex space. And because it's a complex space, previously, these people worked in blended modes. That it was partly sort of something like hard copied, like a face-to-face something, and then mixed with online. So you find that this time now, when we go into COVID, now it's supposed to be strictly online. And that caused a little bit of challenge. And when I said also disturbed expertise roles, it's like you find that the role of the instructional designer or learning designer was pushed also more into ICT expertise, because now you find that our ICT now was also remotely based and was working remotely. And therefore, if there was any problem that needed to be solved, the instructional designer had to go in and sort of, maneuver some ICT expertise. And sometimes that led, of course, to failure to really do what was supposed to be done. And we have the people who are called electronic originators at UNISA. These are people who actually take module data or module information and put it online. And what we mean there sometimes is simply what we also call at UNISA paper behind glass. That means it's just taking whatever was on hard copy and putting it there. And this role now needed to be actually, or need to be unraveled by the instructional designer to say, no. When we put modules strictly or properly online, 1, 2, 3 is supposed to be, done so that the work is done. And this also goes to actually using the support technologies. And so, and again, people saying, this support technology is supposed to be the expertise of ICT people and so. And because of that, you find that these spaces, even in our institution here and there, have been invaded by what I call short-coursed people from technology colleges. You see that people who are coming from technology colleges around South Africa and in cities, normally, I think, again, don't quote me there, they normally specialize in special areas of instructional designing or learning development or whatever. So they are very good in whatever area they are. So if they come into institution, you find that in whatever area that person is, they do a very good job. Now, our pre-instructional designers were generalists. They're supposed to know this and that and that and that. But now, if there's something now that is needed during post-COVID or during COVID, Now you find that if an institution identifies this person who is coming from a technology college from somewhere and is very good in their spaces, they're likely to take that person. The other challenge that faced also the instructional designers was the assessment issues, where assessment actually changed greatly. And yet support and guidance within assessment, new assessment activities really become problematic, because the assessment online or strictly online is not, it's complex, it's not easy. And one has to look at a number of issues on exactly how to do it. And actually now on thinking how should that have been solved, I think an era post-COVID perhaps, or even during the COVID era, is where I think experts in a field of some types of these online activities must come in and help. For example, if it's exams, writing exams, who is an expert in how that is done? Who is an expert on how they are actually invigilated or so? And therefore, who is an expert in preparing an exam that is supposed to go in that direction? Who is an instructional designer or a learning developer who actually develop these activities that are supposed to suit such spaces, so that there isn't problems. And of course, that causes tension in that people think, am I going to lose my job? Because if experts are going to help in some of the jobs of preparing the learning or guiding teaching or guiding assessment, if somebody outside can come and quickly do the job and then it's done, what really is your role as an instructional designer? And therefore, there is really great need, of course, for then staff development for instructional designers. I think the space of instructional designers has been taken for granted in that people think these are people who know, they are the experts, and forget that these people equally need either actually from professional development and in addition, perhaps particular staff development. Because if that doesn't come in handy and quickly, yes, that expertise is going to be questionable, not questionable, but too generalized for the need that is there during COVID and post-COVID. And it starts with the mindset. We said in our institution, actually, for that to happen within these kinds of our support people, support important people, the mindset has to change. We have to start changing the mindset to say, you know what, the spaces that we are getting into now are different. And since the spaces that we are getting into are different, that is actually what is explained in my last slide, which is, I don't know whether you've shared my last slide now, which is just taking it from what I said are the roles of instructional designers and stressing on context and saying the mindset of the instructional designers now must concentrate and be aware of what is the present context. The present context apparently has really changed. It has really changed in the fact that things are supposed to be taught in an emergency, but things are also supposed to be taught in a more concentrated way, where people must know their jobs, know their staff in a more intensive way, and think on a more on-point reflective attitude. And this is how the situation should be at the moment. So, as I have explained previously, there is need for actually professional development for instructional designers and learning designers, learning developers, and also staff development, that is the particular people. Before I started, I think I forgot also to say, the job description of an instructional designer, or that role of an instructional designer, is something that is very difficult actually to find in people when you try to hire. So our institution actually has been looking at people who have been sometimes academics who are supposed to be trained now to be instructional designers. So I think institutionally, there might be in future a need to have a real program or something that develops an instructional designer to be a real perfect fit for higher education institutions. And so, yeah, these are sort of my thoughts. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Toni. That was very insightful, and I think we're already starting to hear from our colleagues how institutionally these roles are changing and becoming quite different. So Toni's highlighted, I think, the somewhat role confusion where some IDs had to take on ICTs, work, and sometimes our institutions don't always understand the different roles and what people do. And you've also highlighted that tension between being a generalist and a specialist. And I'm pretty sure there are many of us that are more generalists depending on our institutions and the different roles and hats that we wear. I think I'm going to hand over to Widad next, and if you can address any questions to Toni following her presentation and insights in the chat. Great, thank you, Widad.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I just want to check with Nicola, is my screen visible?
Yes, we can see your screen perfectly, Widad.
All right, that's wonderful. So nice to hear your voice again, Nicola. So yes, I'll get started. So my name is Widad Sirkhotte, and I'm from the University of Cape Town, and I work at the Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching, also known as SILT. So I'm going to just give you some brief context. I know that my colleagues, Mary-Ann, Janet, Mashudu are all here, so feel free just to jump in if there's any points that you want to speak to or that I've missed. All right, so just some context, some brief context. Before COVID, this was the team. We consisted of 3 learning designers, and there were also learning designers that had senior project coordinator roles, as you can see on screen. We also had a senior learning designer who worked across different work tasks that we needed assistance with. And then we had Janet, who oversaw everything with regards to the team. She's the manager. The projects that we were working on were mostly like MOOCs for Coursera and FutureLearn. And during 2020, we just began working on courses, on formal courses, thinking about blended and online mode. These are just some pictures of what it looked like. So when we worked with academics, we would have various notes and stick it all out. We had our computers open, we had real conversations, face-to-face conversations. We were, as you can see, very much blended over here and face-to-face. But then COVID hit, and this meant that our team was also restructured. So we still had Janet as the manager, but our team, after some months, we decided to split the teams in faculties. So we have the CHIL team, standing for Commerce, Humanities, including Law team. And then we also had the STEM team, the Science, Technology, Engineering, and Maths disciplines. And as you can see, our pictures also updated. So we realized that we also needed to have more friendly images and to update our website. So part of that meant also our pictures updating, as you can see. And we also needed to hire more people just because the workload became quite intense and quite a lot. So we had an additional learning designer hired. And we also had some additional hands, like part-time learning designers and an LD consultant. And more recently, we trained 8 EdTech advisors. These are postgraduate students from UCT, from different faculties, just to help us to assist and support academics, particularly with inclusive and accessibility issues, because that is something that we soon saw it is becoming, it has always been a problem, but even more so in the online terrain. So this is what our team started to look like as we were busy figuring out how to work online completely. And we started testing out MS Teams for our meetings. We continued with our video production, which many of our courses have, but obviously like following strict protocol, wearing masks, and so forth. So just to zoom into, you know, some of the details with regards to working during COVID times. So working conditions, we work completely remotely now. More recently, we're talking about going back to the office, you know, having that flexibility like twice a week or thrice a week and so forth, and making it optional. We also use MS Teams just because it integrates really well with with our other university systems that we use. But we're also using Zoom just because it was easier for some of the academics that we worked with. But we use MS Teams. It runs in the background as we work. It's like a work WhatsApp. If there's a question I have to ask a colleague, we'll just use MS Teams. We have all our team meetings on there and so forth. And this MS Teams, it's like the glue that keeps our team together. We still feel very much connected. So thank you to MS Teams. We also have we also have various platforms that we use just to keep work on track, such as we used, I think it was Monday.com, but there were some political issues and then we stopped using that. So we went back to using Trello. We're still exploring some other project management tools. We're also using time tracking just to see how long it does take us, because we are thinking about standardizing certain processes and figuring out how long it takes and who all is needed. I do find personally that working online and from home, it is longer working hours. Sometimes I'm busy from 8:30 until 8:30 in the evening, you know. Sometimes I don't even take a break. So that is something that is concerning, and I'm not sure if it is impacting other teams, but that is certainly something that has come up for me and some colleagues. In terms of working tasks, so from 2020, as I said, we were working mostly on MOOCs, and we were just starting with, you know, with formal programs. So we were still doing that in COVID, but we were also figuring out how to do that now in online mode. Before it was so easy having the sticky notes available and talking with the academic, looking at the body posture, I mean the gestures and facial expressions, but now doing it online, it was completely crazy. We had to look at new ways of connecting to the academics that often struggled with using technology to connect. We had to figure out which models we could use, how to set up the sheets or the documents that we were using. So there were various background things that we had to do to make course design and production work in online mode. Our focus also became very much on training academic and teaching staff how to use certain tools, how to make use of the LMS. We use, it's called Vula at UCT, but they were using it mostly to store resources. They weren't using the other features. So we had webinars to train staff on how to use it, how to, you know, thinking about online pedagogies, how to connect with their students, and so forth. Besides webinars, we also had one-on-one consults, and just because we felt that some academics would need more of a one-on-one training, and that worked really well. We also started to create resources like how-to guides, and we looked at various technologies that could be used. So we started testing technologies such as Padlet and WhoClap, Hypothesis, and at the same time we were learning these technologies, teaching it, and creating resources. And it just happened all so fast. I'm so amazed, you know, at that. It really pushed us to work, you know, and to produce like instantly. And before we were doing it as well, but on a much slower speed. And just to end off with some of the challenges that we are still figuring out and still experiencing is very much like student engagement, how to do that authentically, what tools are needed, especially for large classes. And I'm talking about like psychology of 1,000 commas. How do we do that? And then inclusive and accessible learning and teaching. We are busy with a very exciting project that Janet Small is leading, where the EdTech advisors are also part of this project. So we're just looking at how that can be done and thinking about UDL and so forth. And like the previous speaker also said, assessment design in online mode, we're still figuring that out, especially like in courses that has a medical or clinical component. So yes, I welcome any questions, and if perhaps my colleagues would like to add, feel free to do so. Yep, and time management, of course, I need to work on personally. Thank you.
Thank you, Widad. That was very, very insightful. I'm going to ask colleagues to share questions for you in the chat and hand over to Gerhard. I know you've joined us. You are here.
Yes, I am, and apologies for having had to withdraw. Such is life. One toggles between 3 parallel meetings. What I've done is I've prepped a slide addressing the question at hand. So if I can share my screen, I can put it out there.
Sure, you should be able to.
If I can just get the right screen up and running. Yeah, that one. So it's not in screen mode, but I'm going to do it in such a way that you can at least read it. The roles of the team, now let me just explain this. CTL at Northwest University is divided into 3 directorates. The one does special projects, all these new things that come up, you know, UCDG, management of those projects, special e-assessment initiatives or whatever, they do that. The second one is largely focused on faculty support, both students and lecturers. So they're sort of the window front end of CTL in terms of the faculties. They do a lot of liaison and they represent CTL, all 3 directorates to a large extent within these faculties, but they are not placed in faculties. They are we've got so-called faculty leads and individuals that are dedicated to a specific faculty in terms of a rendering a support. The third, that's the second faculty, the faculty teaching and learning support. The third one is in actual fact my directorate, and it's identified by a misnomer, centralized teaching and learning functions. Now, what that would be is an open debate, but let's try and assist you. I deal with all matters digital teaching and learning. So we do learning design and we do education, digital teaching and learning environment design and support, DTLE and learning design. But the DTLE team would also have individuals that are learning designers. And what you see on the screen would be a way in which we dealt with the challenges associated with these conflicting roles. In the early years, the LMS team were responsible for the design of learning management modules, the platforms, the learning sites, and they followed learning design principles, but they did it in their own particular way. The other group, which are now called learning design, largely so consisting of graphic designers, multimedia designers, instructional designers, video production specialists. They did the digital teaching material, paper-based teaching material, the graphic support of both LMS and other materials. And when we brought the 2 together, the one domain largely focusing on learning design would have been populated by LMS people, education technologists as well. So you had this awkward tension, creative tension between the 2 parties as to the way they approach learning design. And we actually had to go underground and do a complete review of the roles. Who would do what at what stage? And we followed a value chain approach, a project management protocol, and the ADDIE episodes. and we followed those. And in order to support that, we had to develop at the bottom of this series of bullets a workflow system and based on a project management protocol, where we know exactly which project is registered by whom, who were allocated to deal with it, multidisciplinary team, and when do they kick in, starting with what, and where do they source this. And these interventions are all recorded and on record once, and the key to those records would be the module code. So if a lecturer would want to design or tweak a module, we can gain access to that, and you get immediate feedback as to what has been done on this module, by whom, when, etc. The idea is to work with a module around a 3-year review cycle, which is a pipe dream, because if you make your calculations, over 3-year time, we will have to deal with 3,000 modules, etc., etc. And we only have so many instructional designers and LMS developers and designers, and we ought to get to the target. So moving back to the first bullet, there was a very clear role differentiation. And the second bullet refers to the fact that these roles were differentiated in terms of a design role and a development role. And those two roles apply to both categories of staff, those that are known as instructional designers and education technologists. So a senior education technologist would be responsible for the design in the LMS, and junior education technologists would be responsible for development of a particular site or some functionality and the way that it's integrated. So, and then IDs also used to do the full enchilada. I required IDs to extend. We used to only focus on digital study material and a very large output on multimedia. My request was expand your wings to also work in the LMS environment, and that's where the interesting creative tension came about, and we had to revise the process. So what are IDs now doing? And I think Ulrika might have alluded to this. So we are not speaking with forked tongue, but the IDs are now largely responsible for your high-end, let's call it meso and microcurriculum design and development work of modules that really require serious attention. We all know the tags that those go along. They are the modules at risk, or it could be new programs with new modules, and they participate with the curriculum designers, which are placed elsewhere, awkwardly so, to design, take the design value chain to the point where it becomes activity design, learning design activities. And this is where the IDs feature quite a lot. And then we have a dedicated group of designers that only work on multimedia. Species on their own, I would expect, because they work differently with different tools, and they specialize in that. Then the LMS team would largely be educational technologists, designers and developers, as I've already highlighted. The video production people serve across the spectrum, both LMS work and multimedia clips, etc. And they do on-site video work and back office editing, and it's integrated into wherever, whatever. We have a repository running with lots of learning analytics, which is also managed by one of the, or by the senior, the manager of that video unit. The graphic designers also, they retain their identity as is, but I need to explain this. Considering the fact that, and I've said this on many forums and I'll say it forever until it's fixed or addressed, Northwest University barks with the big dogs, but we do it on a puppy diet. Resource restrained, staff restrained, and we have to work both hard and smart. There's no payoff between the two, we do both. And I had to, in order to generate and establish a platform of instructional designers, tap into resources that are not typically targeted for instructional design training. And that would be graphic designers, multimedia designers. They do not necessarily always have an educational background, but I had to tap into those teams. And we have a program where I have dedicated quite a lot of money to train 12 instructional designers abroad. We have the first cohort recently graduated. The second cohort is busy with their first year. And the third cohort, I had to skip a year because we didn't have staff to identify and send off to abroad to do their studies. It's an online course. They don't spend 2 years abroad. They do it online. So the graphic designers are now siphoned off as they will become instructional designers. And this puts me in an awkward position because now what do I do for graphic designers and what do I do with the multimedia designers that are qualified as as instructional designers? So you siphon off individuals at those levels, pretty important contribution levels, and we run in a shortage of staff because I have to expand the instructional design capacity due to the nature of the season that we are in. And it's not a season that's going to lapse, it's a season that will remain. We all know that, we all understand that, and we are all pursuing that. Some of the edtechs are associated with projects, technology projects that usually are typical of your large enterprise systems, the evaluation, the shortlisting, the participation in tenders, the integration support in terms of IT integration. So they are busy with that and any other unique initiatives. And then we have a multidisciplinary, let's call it a project team, that once a request comes in from faculties, and that is also managed through a platform which is a single port of call where any lecturer, any faculty can go and access, they place the request and it's popped through the project management team. That's the human interface. The project request is evaluated, scoped, etc., and then you allocate resources. So there's a multidisciplinary team consisting of maybe a project manager, maybe an education technologist. There used to be instructional designer, and then they might, this group might rotate as they evolve. And then I stated at the beginning that we do this using a workflow system that we've developed internally. And it works quite well, and it generates data, and we all know where we are with what projects at what stage, and who completed and contributed to it. So these are changing roles, and ID is not an ID anymore. They are even involved in teams that consider the design of teaching and learning spaces. Ulrika can vouch for that. We have edtechs that do that. So we have to work with whom we have, and we have many areas to cover, and we need to be everything for everybody. So although the roles have been differentiated, there's always the option to pull somebody out and associate him or her with a larger or higher calling, like we're now considering the student information system, and I had to withdraw some of my edtechs to participate there. So this is how the roles have changed. There was when we were still 3 separate campuses, albeit one university, there we had rectors per campus. And the one rector was a very well-known, staunch researcher. I say this with all due respect. And he always said, if a researcher lifts up his or her head, there's something wrong. And this is what I'm saying about the edtechs and the education instructional designers. If they lift their head, there's something wrong. And I can assure you people, these people are bending over in all directions to deal with the workload that we are facing, and it's growing, and it's not going to stop. And we have to revise at least 135 to 150 modules per semester. We do not hardly reach that point. So we've got our work cut out for everyone, but I can tell you this team works like hell. They work themselves into comas, to the point where we now have reached burnout in several individuals. In closing, I was able, if there was any school or directorate or whatever entity at university level that was ready and actually were able to embrace COVID, open arms, full blown, no hesitance, no reluctance, no incapability. They switched weight from the one leg to the other, from an on-campus presence to an off-campus presence, because we were ready and we were able to assist lecturers, and we've done so. We've proved our value over the past 18 months, working remotely and having supported this university to go online, hybrid, paper-based, whatever. We were there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerhard. And I also appreciate the honesty. And, you know, in a lot of our spaces, you find the different universities kind of brag with what they've been able to do or are doing. And very few people, unless in a safe space or a community, are really acknowledging that, look, the burnout is real. Yeah. And we've got some interesting comments. Sorry, go for it, Gerhard.
If you have an individual discussion with a coordinator, that's what we call them. They're actually unit managers, and he tells you, listen, I'm experiencing tension, like in angina. You know, there's something wrong. This person has never indicated this before. Serious stress. And we need to deal with it, and we do.
And I guess, thank you. So you're also giving us the heads up that we need to look out for our colleagues and, you know, listen deeply. And perhaps we can, yeah.
I'm not sure whether there are questions. I know there were questions about, you know, this whole, the different interpretation of flip, which I couldn't attend to, unfortunately. Would you want me to answer that now, or would you more rather appreciate the questions to be focused on the changing roles?
Oh, it's fine. I'll follow up with you individually about that question that I had.
Okay.
But yeah, I think there were in the chat, there were questions around, and maybe if I can just ask Tshepo, who's presenting next, to get ready. And ask if that's fine. Are you ready to present next, Tshepo, from Walter Sisulu?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, wonderful. Maybe you can share your screen so long. Do you have any slides?
Yeah, I'll share just one slide.
Okay, perfect. So there were some questions around how you manage Gerhard, such a big team, and if you have any shared processes. That was a question, I think, by Janet.
Okay, so help me with the concept of shared processes. Do we have our processes aligned in such a way that they overlap and they work in the same direction?
Yeah, Gerhard, you were mentioning that, you know, you coordinate the project from request to completion across all these roles. I was wondering how you did that.
As I said, we have this workflow system that was recently designed. You know, it's part of a legacy that we established prior to restructuring of the university, because we used to have a campus focus only, and I had a team set up in such a way. It took some time and pain and blood and guts to get these individuals working together as a team, and that they kick in. So that was a sort of a in their DNA already. And when we joined 3 campuses, we had 3 sets of DNA, like seriously fundamental differences in terms of the way that they worked. And we had to go through this process all over again. So there was a lot of change management process, a long extended phase of that, and unpacking, a collaboration between all role players, unpacking of the roles and the expectations. You know, there's a nexus between a role and an expectation. The sweet spot is where everything goes wrong or right. The extremes would always have a negative aftermath, because what you define your role as to be and what I thought I could expect from you are worlds apart. And we had to get those aligned. And that took some time, several iterations, and we got it sorted. Now that that was sorted, we started developing. It was a tandem process. We had an app. It's an app that we developed that where you can register a particular project. You link all the role players with their different role differentiations, and they start liaising with each other within teams and registering progress on the app. So we work along along that system, but the DNA has been established across the 3 campuses, and they are sort of unique species. We've differentiated ourselves in ways that with a very strong learning undertone. We do learning design, and we think of the student and not the lecturer, although we acknowledge all domains that need to be accommodated in this. So it's a very disciplined environment, but it's not such that it suppresses the creativity. The only group that sort of breaks away from this would be the instructional designers that take responsibility for the curriculum design work at micro and meso level, wherever that dividing line lies. But they also participate in the learning design where their presence are required. This is a decision made because we only have, at this stage, 5 instructional design positions. But I have 8 IDs qualified, and I have to accommodate these individuals sooner rather than later in a formal sense. So we had to take away the 5 IDs and allocate them to the curriculum work, because that's where they can make their largest contribution, fundamental, because you start correct, and then the rest of the team kicks in when it comes to the learning design of activity level within a module. They sit in different buildings, in different venues, open plan settings, but we actually sat in 60 odd different studies the past 18 months. And I can tell you whether these individuals trained, whether they supported, consulted, workshopped, breakaway rooms, checkups, etc. You know, these individuals were on guard, in place, in position, and we didn't drop balls. There might have been a few odds and ends that slipped through our fingers, but the short and the sweet is the system became the vehicle through which we controlled our activity.
Thank you very much, Gerhard. I'm going to hand over to our colleague from Walter Sisulu University, Tshepo. So over to you, Tshepo.
Thank you, thank you. What I wanted to reflect on, I think most of my colleagues have already reflected on, but I would just want to contextualize my reflection even to my practice. So for us at WSU, we before the lockdowns and the COVID affected us, really, we were more concerned about taking academics from using basic from just face-to-face to using basic e-learning. Basically, we're just going to put them on the substitution level of the summer model. And when COVID hit us, we then had to do it at a very, very large scale to people who were also reluctant. Quite a number of the lecturers were thinking that COVID will be a 3-month thing and then it will pass, or there was also that COVID denialism and all of these conspiracy theories. But to that extent, the university created this blended learning statement, which they realized that going forward, we cannot continue with just face-to-face. to an extent that currently, when students were coming, they said 70% face-to-face, and then 30% needs to be online, whereby they are doing synchronous online via Teams as a way to push academics to be using technology. So you'll be having 2 days which are face-to-face and 1 day which is online. Now, the statement that the university developed, they developed a framework which sort of answers one question that I put here. On the second part is, it says, what should we focus on for ourselves as the LTWT team, which is the Learning and Teaching Technology team. Like, there's still a need for us to find out who we are. I think that even the previous speakers have been saying that we need to clearly define our roles in our universities. So we also need to define ourselves of who we are, and for us, we are going to be defining ourselves based on this learning, blended learning statement, which I can just quote one thing on it. It says, it provides opportunities for students to engage in discussing, debating, developing, understanding, reflecting, and building knowledge, integrating face-to-face technology and mediated interactions. That is focused on students because it's blended learning for student success. It's focused on students, it's student-centered. Now, that means that when the students come, the people who are within the university must be capacitated to give the students all of these opportunities. And they need to be doing that in a technology-mediated interaction or environment. So where do we position ourselves as the unit for learning and teaching with technology, so that the students that come to us, knowing where they come from in rural areas, very few come from urbanized areas, knowing where they come from and knowing our lecturers and their capabilities, where do we position ourselves now, and where do we want to go 10 years from now, and so forth. There's also a need to know which other departments are we going to be working with. There I've mentioned one, which is TDS, Teacher Development Specialist, that we have here. They have also realized that there is a need for them to have digital pedagogists. That is, they need to start working more like us. And we also have realized that we also need to start working more like them, because there is assessment, which is a pedagogic approach or a pedagogic topic, which is now being debated as to how can this assessment be online and also be authentic. Because I think that most of the time, the only way that an assessment can be authentic is if the students are sitting down and writing, not when they are having other forms of assessment. And there's also a need to gain knowledge on emerging technologies. When COVID started, we realized that we were concentrated more on academics and students, to an extent that we were not developing ourselves as on par with the rest of the world, if I should say that, and not interacting more with the various learning modules which are there. We were just looking at the summer model and also the TPEC, when there are other theoretical frameworks which are there, which can be more contextual to us. Recently, I've been looking at this LIMS sociocultural theory. And you see that once you start to use that, then you can position the digital technologies within the environment where you are and see how, be able to measure the impact that they have in that environment. And then we also need to grow our team. As I just saw here with the Northwest University, they have quite a large team, and they have also capacity. They are starting to capacitate their team with various things. So for instructional designers here at WSU, there's a big need for learning design. We need to know how to design learning for the rural-based students, because our learning design, I would argue that it cannot be the same as UCT, as WITS, even similar universities like Limpopo and Venda. We need to know our context and our students and design learning which would work best for them. And even for educational technologies, there's a need for multimedia design. I was listening about the guys for graphic design, and I realized that I come from a background of computer science. So when you mix that computer science and you come to social sciences, which is teaching, you get to realize that there's a big bridge that you need to cross. The people who have done graphic design, people who have done IT, they are not well conversant with the issues of social sciences, the theories, the pedagogies, and whatnot. There's also a need that even the educational technologies need to be taken from the pure science to the social sciences, so that they can be able to, when they develop these teaching artifacts, if I should say that, the teaching artifacts should be able to speak to the content that is being taught and also the context which it is being taught in. I think that is all for me. I didn't want to be too long. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Tshepo. I'm hearing that the sort of learning design, instructional design role looks very different depending on our institutions and our contexts. And, also seeing, kind of being exposed to the variety of, institutions where, we have to sometimes be generalists, or the way our university understands the roles, versus others where, they are more specialists. Perhaps some colleagues can share perhaps if you've got a question for Tshepo, or if you have a reflection on this panel. So anyone if you'd like to take the mic, you can type M into the chat and we'll hand the mic over to you. And I also see there are quite a few comments here. So people, and also different people's backgrounds. So I know that there was another question, who does the curriculum stuff now?
Okay, for curriculum here, curriculum is the content. So the content needs to be coming with the lecturer, but the support team needs to be able to understand the pedagogies that are needed to make sure that the curriculum is delivered.
True, but I think what we've also seen in our context is the assumptions that we sometimes have of lecturers' curriculum knowledge, or how they had to change that to adapt for emergency remote teaching, required us to have perhaps some, definitely to have some curriculum knowledge as well. Greig, mic over to you.
Thanks, Nicola. If I can just maybe end off with just 2 points, and thanks for this great session. The one is I just wanted to say the issue of burnout in our space is a real concern. And I think that's something that all of us need to look at, because I think relying on our universities to support us in this regard, I'm not sure that we're really going to get much traction there. So I think, all of us who work in support as learning designers, we do so because we want to support, we want to help, we want to assist. And sometimes we find it difficult to ask for help ourselves. So I think just over the past period and looking forward, I think this is something that we really need to ourselves make sure that we don't end up burning out, and looking for ways in which we can find, you know, safe spaces to decompress and to make sure that we're not taking on too much. So I think that's one point that I just wanted to leave the session with. And I think the other thing, and I see that Laura Chernovich is here. So I just wanted to maybe just mention that Laura Chernovich wrote a nice analysis of the role of teaching and learning centers in South African universities. So if you haven't seen that paper, then it's quite a good resource to read, just in terms of how learning support and learning design happens so differently across different spaces. And I think also Laura and Nicola, you can maybe just share in the chat. I think Laura is going to talk about it next week at an Emerge Africa webinar. So I think that would be quite useful for people to hear about as well. Thanks so much. Thanks, Nicola.
Yeah, pleasure, Greg. And I think, yeah, apologies with the timing and flipping between, you know, switching between presenters. Yeah, I didn't mean for that to get underplayed, because I know, you know, we've had these discussions. The burnout is real. And I think, you know, rather than underplay that, how do we support each other going forward as a community? I mean, I'm even thinking of my own space and things that are being kind of added to our roles. Yeah, and it just doesn't stop.